Right, it's talk time now. Former military president Ibrahim Babangida has joined the call for a part-time legislature in order to cut the cost of governance in the country.
Babangida said although a proposal by his regime to make the National Assembly part-time in 1989 never came to fruition, he still strongly believed in it. We're joined by a former lawmaker, Olorunbe Mamura, and also from our Abuja studio, we have a political analyst, Mark Olise. Many thanks for joining us this morning, gentlemen. Senator, thank you for coming to TVC Breakfast. And of course, we have our guest in Abuja there. Really, the call for part-time legislature, you were. So I should just give you the very first question, really. Would you have loved to have worked as a part-time senator?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and good morning. For me, I think it's not about me, really. It's about what Nigerians want. We say democracy is the government of the people, for the people, and by the people. So it's the choice of the people. But if you want me to be personal, I will say no.
Why not?
You see, there are pros, there are cons. The first question is do you have any presidential democracy anywhere in the world where the legislators, work on part-time? I mean, national, at the national. I know in the US, for example, the states, they have different models, part-time, semi-part-time, then, of course, full-time. They have that. It depends on what the resources of the state, can carry, and, of course, how much involvement they want the legislators to be in terms of the governance processes and all that. Again, but at the national level, in the US, you have bicameral legislature in every state except Nebraska. Nebraska is the only state that is unicameral, but all other states they are bicameral. But in the federal, at the federal level, it is full-time for everyone. So some of these states, like I said, in the US, they have three options, full-time, semi-part-time, semi-full-time, and then, of course, part-time. But again, you see, we tend to make a mistake in terms of looking at the cost. And when you really break it down at the end of the day, you discover that it's not really the cost in terms of emoluments of lawmakers that is the issue. It's the issue of the bureaucracy itself. Every time, I just sit back and watch, because at times I see a lot of ignorance, being at display. Look at the National Assembly as we have it right now. Once you talk about the allocation, or the appropriation, everybody just looks at it as if the money is just shared by the lawmakers. 109 senators and, of course, 360 members. It's not that way. You have National Assembly bureaucracy. You have the Nigerian Institute of Legislative Studies. You have so many other, bureaucratic setups that are under the National Assembly as an entity. So, but what we really need to look at is the productivity. How do we measure? How do we assess productivity of a legislator? And that should be the issue. So we shouldn't just. I don't want a situation where we'll, cut our nose to spite our face. So we need to look at it. For me, whatever the people want, let it be, but let it be based on robust argument. Let it be based on robust assessment of what we want. Because every time people just think that...
Is the argument of not being able to pay workers robust enough to say, okay, let's cut down cost and let's have part-time?
I'm saying that it doesn't have to be restricted to emoluments of lawmakers. Look at the whole setup itself. What are we having there that we should not have? Or what are we having there that we need to reduce? This is what we should be looking at. Legislation has become so complex that a lot of people just think it's about lawmaking. No! In fact, representation, like I always argue, is the most important. You need that effective representation before you can even be a good lawmaker.
Okay, let's bring in Mark Olisa here from our Abuja studio. Mark, it's good to have you join us right now. Now, you are one Nigerian and you've been listening to people, you've been talking to people generally. Why is there a call for our legislatures to be, or legislation to be part-time generally? Can you give us an idea of why Nigerians are calling for this?
Hello, can't hear you clearly.
All right, Mark Olisa, if you can hear me now, I'm asking, there are calls for legislation in Nigeria to be part-time. We've heard that from so many people. Even the former military president, Babangida, in our report, we just talked about it recently. He alluded to that as well. Why is there the call in the first instance for there to be part-time legislation in Nigeria?
I don't think that call is really popular.
Okay.
It's just that those who have made the call, they are popular themselves. Or they are,
I like that.
But basically, I don't think they are putting into consideration the enormous responsibility that is bestowed upon the parliament under a presidential system. Under a presidential system of government, the job of the legislature, is captured within the context of the separation of powers. Within that context, the legislature oversights the executive. They oversee, they review, they monitor, they investigate. In fact, it is part of their inherent powers. So you cannot do that applying part-time measures. You require full-time legislators to monitor government parastatals, agencies, and the executive generally. You need people to engage in that act fully.
All right.
So that is the...
Okay. Now let's bring in more perspective to the idea of part-time legislation in Nigeria. Now I'll take you to my wall so we can have, certainly if we look at some of the arguments from Nigerians, it basically talks about how much money is accruable to legislators, how much money goes in, and what is coming out. Like the senator has talked about now the issue, we should look at the issue of productivity, not just how much senators are collected. But the point there is, we can't also not run away from the fact of what Nigerians are saying. Maybe that's what they are seeing. So we'll try to see the connect or the disconnect where it exists, as the case may be. Now let's have this on. Now Nigeria operates a federal system of government wherein the president leads the executive there, and certainly the legislature is led by the Senate and the House of Reps. You have the Senate president at the top, and then the Speaker House of Reps, which form the bicameral legislature in Nigeria. And then we have the judiciary, which is run headed by the chief judge, as the case may be. If we move on. Now, Nigerian legislators are among the world's top paid. In fact, until plunging oil prices started putting pressure on the Nigerian naira earlier this year, the Nigerian lawmakers were the second highest paid lawmakers in the world. Let's break it down. That's what statistics show. We'll give you some of this, and certainly we'll get to see whether Senator Mamora will agree with that on one hand or not. But President Buhari presented a 6 trillion naira budget to the National Assembly. In the budget, a total of 115 billion naira was allocated to the National Assembly alone, and that generated reactions from many Nigerians who think the lawmakers are getting too much for little work in the context to which you see it. But let's move on.
If you allude to what Senator said now, that there are a lot of bureaucracy attached to the National Assembly, that the money doesn't just go to the lawmakers alone, but some institute, for instance, some commission, for instance, are attached to the National Assembly.
Yeah, exactly. And those institutes are things Nigerians don't really know. So we certainly get to that level where we make Nigerians understand. If we say 115 billion is given to the National Assembly, what is it really meant for? And how come Nigerians are so disconnected from understanding actually how much money goes into this National Assembly and what they are meant for? So we'll get into all of that. Now, moving on. Now, economic watchers say an average Nigerian live on less than $2 daily, and the minimum wage is still at 18,000 naira. We all know that. In 12 months, a civil servant would earn 216,000 naira. Let's see a graphic picture of what that represents. If we break this down now, generally, 18,000 naira is the minimum wage in Nigeria. So if you multiply that by 12 months, you're getting 216,000 naira. That's how much an average worker in Nigeria is going to get. Now, if we move it on, now a senator in Nigeria, all right, now a senator in Nigeria earns about 30 million naira every month. In 1 year, the senator, if you have to make all the calculations, it will amount to about 356 million naira. Now, this is total difference from other allowances allocated to offices. Let's also see this breakdown. Now, if all of this, you see the breakdown in there's allowances for vehicle and gas maintenance. There's allowance. The basic salary is about 2.26 million naira. And then there are allowances for vehicle and gas maintenance, which is about 1.5 million. There's for domestic staff, which is about 1.5 million, thereabout. And they have about allocated about 506,000 naira. And then for wardrobe, that's for clothing, you know, and all of that. You have also about 506,000 naira. Then for newspapers and for information and all of that, you have about 303,000 naira allocated to that, amongst other issues in there. And then the issue of constituency funds is another big question. Maybe Nigerians also don't understand, but certainly Senator Mamora is in the house to give us an understanding of how that money really goes, and about 5 million naira is allocated for constituency related
If you look
issues.
at your graph there, interestingly, we didn't put a figure to that. Where
Yeah, because there are so many, they're still
you have
ongoing.
somebody launching and somebody traveling out.
The traveling and so on.
Housing allowances are also there.
They're still there.
Okay.
Senator Mamora will give us an idea on that. Well, but Senator, before I go ahead, basically,
Oh my God.
you know, these are figures reeled out. And when Nigerians hear this,
Those figures are not real.
oh, really?
Okay,
They are not real.
Okay.
I can tell you that.
Okay, give us a perspective.
You see, I don't even know where those figures are coming. Well, I think the most important thing for me is what you said, that 30 million naira per month. It's not possible.
Okay.
Go and work it out. It's not possible. You see, and the point I'm making, which I tried to make earlier on, is that there is so much ignorance about the workings of the legislature. And at the end of the day, each time you say these things, the legislature becomes the fall guy of the three arms of government. The three arms of government that are supposed to be coordinates, equal in power and ranking. That's what coordinate means. And yet now you want to make the legislature the fall guy. Why not talk about part-time part-time executive? Why not talk about part-time judiciary?
Have you thought
Why are you
of,
talking
have you thought of the
legislature?
reason that maybe because a lot of secrecy is going on there, that's why you have this misinformation
No.
and misgivings? Why can't they make their billings and their allowances and their salaries public? So if it's out there in the public domain, then there won't be such misgivings.
You see, you know there is what we call the single story, or mindset, or stereotype. They are all similar. Stereotype, that's the mindset, that's the belief. And people just hold on to it, and no matter what you say, they don't even want to believe or to think of any other thing. Now, yes, if people choose to really know what is going on, they can know what is going on. Yes, people have talked about this. They need to make these things transparent and all that. I'm for it. I don't have a problem with that. But I'm saying that Nigerians need to understand what the business of the legislature is all about. It's not just about lawmaking. You have you have representation, you have oversight, you have legitimizing roles, that is confirmation of appointment and all that. Are you saying now that each time Mr. President or the governor believes that, thinks that certain appointments have been made and then there is need for confirmation, you recall. Listen, how many recalls would you be making? Because if you make it part-time, it means that you have to recall when there is something, when there is even an emergency or something, you have to recall. That's the implication. But I'm saying it is not the best, and I'm not aware of any presidential democracy, at least at the federal level, where you have that kind of attitude.
Okay, we'll come to understanding if at all there has to be a part-time, how it works. We'll come to that. Now, according to, let's move on in here. Now, according to the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission, a senator gets about, a senator is certainly entitled to all of this. Accommodation allowances, which is about 4 million naira. We have vehicle allowance, which is about 8 million naira. Furniture allowance, which is about 6 million naira. And severance gratuity, which is about 6 million naira. Those are the statistics we got from the Revenue Allocation and Mobilization Fiscal Commission. Let's move on now. Now, don't forget that I said earlier on that the minimum wage for an average Nigerian is 18,000 naira, which is common knowledge, and that means a civil servant will earn a total of 216,000 naira per annum, and that civil servant will have to work for an average of 60 years to earn the annual salary and allowances of a Nigerian senator. If we break it down this way, even though Senator Mamora said these figures are not true, but certainly we're waiting to actually get the true figures of what the senators actually earn. If we move on, according to The Economist, the salary collected by Nigerian senators and members of the House of Reps is way ahead of those received by fellow parliamentarians in other countries. So let's see just a few countries. If we go to Britain, for instance, the average parliamentarian there gets about 1.3 million naira, if we have to do the calculations translating or converting to naira. If you go to Sweden, it's about 1.2 million naira. If you go to Kenya, you have about 250,000 naira. If you in South Africa, it's about 2.6 million naira. In the United States, it's about 2.3 million naira. Don't mind this figure. It's about 2.3 million naira. So, and Barack Obama earns 64 million naira. If you have to do the calculations per annum, that's the president of the United States of America. Now, one begging question is, how was the salaries of the lawmakers calculated in the first place? Now, let's move to our Abuja guest in here now. Mark, let me bring you in here. You talked about the enormous responsibility that is before the legislators, which does not warrant the call for part-time legislation generally. Now, can you give us a perspective? The senator here says that we should look at the productivity of what the legislators are doing. From your perspective, you've been monitoring the system. Would you say that the productivity is commensurate to how much a senator or House of Rep receives in a month or year?
Well, the true figures of what they receive is actually not out there, because all figures that come out are disputed. You know, be that as it may, you know, judging from the budget, we can tell that you know, the output is not commensurate with the input. If senators in the United States receive 2.3 million naira monthly, and we can see the output comes in the form of GDP up to about $20 trillion, you know, we should expect that the percentage of a senator or a representative's salary relative to the GDP is what should be the ratio in Nigeria, you know. But I know that the constraints on the legislature in Nigeria, it is beyond all people think or people put into consideration when analyzing the pay of legislators. You know, there are constitutional constraints in this country. There are constitutional constraints, you know, and these constraints has made it, you know, difficult for those with the right mental capacity and political know-how to get into such positions, such that they will be able to carry out their job of lawmaking, overseeing, monitor, review, and investigate the executive for the purpose of good governance and for the purpose of, producing a very robust GDP
Mark,
and high national income.
Okay, Mark, some of the proponents.
The problem is, I think going forward,
Mark, some of the proponents of part-time legislation actually said, alluded to what you're talking about, that if you get professionals who have their own callings, for instance, their own offices, lawyers or doctors who have what to do and come in and just legislate on a part-time basis, then you can have a caliber of people who are really sound upstairs, people who are really, really studious to man the National Assembly. Mark?
I think, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Basically, it is not about people being professionals. The fact that you are a professional doctor, a professional lawyer, or a professional anything does not give you the political know-how. It doesn't also make it, mandatory that you must know how to perform political functions. You understand? It is people become of such competence as a result of the political process or the political engineering of any country. That's why I talked about the constitutional constraint. For you to even get a part-time legislature, you need to also go back to the Constitution. The reason why the legislature is not functioning to optimal capacity in Nigeria, it is because the Nigeria as presently constituted is not completely democratic. In a completely democratic society, the process of constitution making is democratic. People don't impose constitution on the people where they don't even discuss the system of government that they want. They don't discuss, the structure of government. They don't discuss how to organize free and fair elections. They don't organize how the political culture, of the country can be enduring and can best serve the people.
Okay.
I think going forward, what has to happen, whether people, for those who are talking about part-time legislative, or those who are supporting the position of full-time, which is what is operational in all the presidential systems in the world, is that they have to go back to remake the constitution of the country, with people representing various constituents.
Okay.
To restructure this country, to weed off so many of these unviable states and local governments that are now the real encumbrances on the effective utilization of the limited fund.
All right, Mark, I'm going to come back to you.
It is also one way in which national productivity can be boosted.
All right, Mark.
The problem is about national productivity.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. We're still going to come back to you shortly. I'd like to bring in Foladele Falana here to join us and then give us a reaction of what Nigerians, how they've been reasoning and thinking online generally. Fola, it's good to have you join us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Mike.
You look good.
Good morning, sir. All right, so very insightful conversation, I would say. And I'd like to share some reactions with you. All right, so at Dami_A says, totally in support of part-time legislature in Nigeria. This would help reduce cost of governance significantly. So, of course, talking about the cost that you spoke about earlier. And this one had a totally different mindset about it and said, don't be surprised that this man, referring to the former head of state, Babangida, don't be surprised that this man will want to aspire for presidential seat come 2019. At Hills Clem says, part-time legislature isn't the problem, but the allowances is the problem. Okay. At at G Monike says, where in the world do you have a part-time legislature and why do you think it can work here? Build strong institutions. And at Istiaro says, we had poor legislative attendance with full-time legislature. Part-time legislature will virtually be non-existent legislature. The last one here says, it was by @JackPiper001, and he says, we don't need a part-time legislature. All we need is a sizable unicameral legislature. This is, of course, as opposed to the bicameral one we currently run. My question is for you, Senator Mamora. So, now, according to the Constitution, the legislators are supposed to sit for 181 days in a year.
Minimum.
But yes, minimum, yes.
Minimum.
But we hear that it was recorded that in the legislative year that ended in June, they didn't meet the requirements, which would suggest part-time, but they received their full pay. Why is this so? I think this is the question that is on everyone's mind.
Well, it depends on, again, that takes me back to what I said earlier on. That, the generality of Nigerians, they don't seem to really understand the workings of the legislature. Sitting does not necessarily mean sitting at plenary.
Okay.
You sit in the committees, you sit at plenary. You have some other sittings, maybe, public hearing and all that. There are also sittings, and then, of course, there is a way of doing this calculation. And then, of course, the question is who is monitoring what? You see, one of the problems we have is the process, the recruitment process into the National Assembly and even the state assemblies. A situation where a godfather sits down and decides who goes, whether the person merits or not, is a big problem. It also happens at the national.
Before we go into that, let's just stick to the issue of truancy that
Yes.
Foladele was talking about. Do you hold a plenary session and some other committee session concurrently while the plenary is going? Because sometimes you look at the they are empty. Are they concurrent? Where the plenary is going on, you have some committees meeting at the same time.
And also, if we're talking facts, actually, the House of Representatives apparently sat for 104 times. They sat for 104, and the Senate was 96. So this was just about 55% of the requirement.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how the sitting, the sitting was calculated. The committee does not necessarily have to sit concurrently, but there are situations, there are times when that happens. There are times when that happens. Because if you just limit the sitting to just the plenary, then you may have a problem. But there are certain sittings, because you have sittings of a committee of the whole, which could even be, well, it happens sometimes like that. Of course, and don't forget again that the legislature has been given that constitutional power to determine its own procedure. That's the power. It's a kind of omnibus power that it's invested with that power to determine its own procedure.
All right, Fola, let's leave you to go now.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Now, Senator, let's have just a basic understanding of the scenario of having, even though both of you have said it's not desirable in the Nigerian situation, but let's have a basic scenario of if there's a call or if there's going to be a part-time legislation, what dimension does it take? How would it have looked like?
Well, if you said, we should have part-time legislature, for me, like I've said, it's not desirable. But what it will mean is that Mr. President, well, because I'm limiting to the National Assembly now, can, when he has something to do, apart from agreeing on maybe per quarter, you say the legislature will be in session for 6 weeks, per quarter, ordinarily. It means the activities of government that will require legislative input will have to be structured to take place within that 6-week period. But again, if in any situation or in a circumstance that there are some exigencies that come up outside of the period agreed to, then it means legislators will be recalled. But what it means again to be recalled is that there has to be provision for, transportation of these legislators to base. The base is in Abuja. Let's limit it to the National Assembly. The base is that, and of course there has to be provision for accommodation as well. Because if you've been elected as a part-time legislator, and the understanding is that you will sit for 6 weeks, during a quarter, and you've made your arrangement maybe for accommodation to stay somewhere for 6 weeks, and that is suddenly disrupted for one reason or the other, it means whoever is bringing you down has to be responsible.
So the bureaucracy you were talking about attached to the national, will they also sit on part-time basis?
That is, no, don't ask me that question. I should ask you that question. I should ask you that question.
We're painting the scenario, so what would that be?
No, because I am not for it.
Okay.
I am not for it. So it's those who are for it that should, give us a template to follow. I'm not for it because you may even, that's why I said you may discover that you're cutting your nose to spite your face at the end of the day. And you saw one of the things, that somebody, in one of the tweeters, reaction, that if you have truancy, even under a full-time legislature, and you now want part-time, then you may have a non-existent, because you see, if you're sitting full-time, it gives you all the time to do all. I've told you, there's so many things. People just look at lawmaking. I think it's just to make law. That is all that's required. You have confirmation of appointment. You have oversight. How do you carry out your oversight if you have a part-time legislature? So is it that you will have to be calling yourself wherever, maybe somebody is outside of the country, you have to recall, okay, the committee has to go and do an oversight somewhere. How do you do it? It's not really practicable. I mean, particularly at the national level. I told you in the US, where some of these states could have this part-time thing, but it's even better if it's at the state level. They know it can be managed better. But at the national level, where you need to summon people or people have to go to the center, it becomes more complicated and may not, it may just be penny-wise, pound foolish.
All right, let's bring Mark Olise in here on the issue of recess. The recess, if you calculate it, some people have said it's come out about 6 months in a year for the recess of the lawmakers. Do you think that should still continue based on the productivity we are talking about?
I didn't get your question.
My question is on the recess. Are you okay with what they have now, the number of time they go on holidays?
Well, I don't think, I'm okay with that. But then, as I said earlier, the reason why these things are going the way it's going now is that the National Assembly of Nigeria is peopled by individuals who lack the mental capacity. Only a few of them have what it takes to occupy, legislative seats and perform legislative functions. The art of lawmaking is, scientific today. You require a lot of capacity built over time. You require a high level of intellect. And that is what is lacking. If they know what really their functions are, because the parliament operates with standing committees to oversee the federal government parastatals and agencies on the environment. There are environmental challenges every day. Standing committees on communication. There are telecoms and communication challenges every day, So the point I'm trying to make is that the job of the National Assembly is such that they need to be on the alert daily.
Okay. Mark, I need to thank you
the
very much.
The ship of state is not one you should leave to float in outer space.
Okay.
You need to monitor the day-to-day activity.
All right, Mark, thank you very much for talking to us and spending your time with us on TVC Breakfast. Thank you. All right, Senator, let me come back to you here finally before we go. We've been talking about strong institutions in Nigeria. The National Assembly is a powerful institution that has a role to play in ensuring there are strong institutions in Nigeria generally. Looking at where we are now, where we need to go, from the window of National Assembly, what should they do to enhance productivity, one that you talked about, and also strengthening the kind of institutions that we should be building as a country?
Well, strong institutions, they don't just fall from heaven. Strong institutions are strong because of the people in that institution. I mean, those institutions. Now, again, you must, I mentioned the process. The process should be such that will throw up the brightest and best, particularly at the national level. What I know of, you know, a number of countries that have national parliaments, is the national parliament is supposed to be, you know, a forum where you showcase the best from your state. Because you are there primarily to represent. And part of your representative job is to bring the best to your state. You cannot bring the best if you're not the best. A situation
So do we have the best? Let me just sneak now in. Do we have the best of the best there now?
Well, I'm not sure. That's, I mean, I have my query over that. I mean, you should be the one to do that. Because in choosing the best, you want to look at the pedigree of that person. You want to look at the educational attainment. You want to look at the merit the person has. You want to look at the capacity, the ability. You have to look at, you know, the competence of that person. These are the things that will make up the best we're talking about. Because you're supposed to showcase and bring the best. And of course, the best from all the states coming together and of course, getting the best for the entire country and getting the best for the state you are representing.
All right, Senator Olorunnipe Mamora, thank you very much for coming on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. We also thank Mark for joining us from Abuja earlier on. Now, this is where we come to the end of today's edition of TVC Breakfast. We've talked about several issues, but certainly it is for us all to work hand in hand as a country in building all the institutions that are needed. Tomorrow is going to be another time again for us to come discuss other issues. I am Mike Okwache.
And I am Busola Mitunwashi. Enjoy the rest